It's 17 minutes now to 1. Jonathan Isaby and Drita Say Mitchell are having a look through our national newspapers, our front pages. Jonathan, where are we going next?
Well, we've gone 43 minutes without talking about Brexit. I think I've got to dive in. And let's go to the Telegraph. And firstly, the Matt cartoon. Matt, who is brilliant at telling us, giving a take on the big story of the day. As I said, it is now December. So the Matt cartoon in tomorrow's Telegraph has somebody opening their advent calendar. And the quote is, "Every day a new person reveals they're against the Brexit plan." And, of course, the latest person to do that is Sam Gyimah, who was, until a couple of hours ago, the universities minister.
He's gone. Another one bites the dust.
He's gone. And he, of course, was a Remainer. Now, and this is just another reminder that this deal that the Theresa May has agreed has basically upset absolutely everybody.
I was smiling to myself because I saw Peston sending a tweet an hour or so ago, basically said that they asked for number 10's reaction to Gyimah going, and they got back and Peston said, "This is what we're getting all the time now. It's terrible. I can't do an impression of Peston. Thank God I can't." And he said he got back from number 10. The Theresa May thanks him for his service, and that's the standard line now.
Yes, well,
as every minister goes. We thank him for his service. Let's move on.
Because historically, if you resign, there's often an exchange of letters where you thank the Prime Minister for the opportunity, but say, "I'm afraid I've come to the position I can't support the policy." She writes a polite letter back saying, "Thank you for your service and you've done some great things and I'm sorry you feel this way." I mean, the last few, that just isn't happening anymore. It's the letter machine has broken.
Jonathan.
Yeah. Well, I say, and Gyimah's written an op-ed for the Telegraph, which they've got on the front page of the paper, which is pretty damning. It talks about how the deal, we surrender our voice, our vote and our veto, and basically have to rely on the best endeavours of the EU to strike a final agreement. Well, and this is the thing, because people keep talking about, this deal. Actually, all this deal is the divorce agreement, which involves handing over the £39 billion for not a great deal in return. And the political declaration, the 26-page flimsy document, is the one saying, "Oh, well, we want to have a trade deal and we want to do X, Y and Z in the future." But these are all airy-fairy notions. They aren't actually guaranteed. It isn't actually a deal. And his point here is, from his experience negotiating with Europe over the years, is that Europe will be in control and the UK's negotiating position will be, virtually non-existent.
Well, look,
once this, if we do agree to handing over this money and agreeing to this backstop potentially, which would lock us into the customs union. I mean, it is absolutely atrocious as a deal. It is united Remainers and Leavers against it.
We heard from our political reporter Pete Saul earlier on the programme about this latest resignation. He's the universities minister, isn't he? Sam Gyimah. I say isn't he, as if many normal people will have heard of these people. They won't have. But anyway, Sam Gyimah is the next to go, and Pete Saul has been telling me why this is more bad news for the Prime Minister.
It is another major blow for the Prime Minister this evening, the seventh minister to resign over the deal that she reached with the European Union. Sam Gyimah certainly doesn't pull his punches in the article he's put out accompanying his resignation, saying that it's a naive plan that the Prime Minister is putting forward. And he says that any deal that we strike with Brussels will be, in his words, EU first. The clinching factor for him, I think, as Science Minister, is the announcement from the government this evening that the UK is going to be fully pulling out of the pan-European programme to build a satellite navigation system, Galileo. He said that's a deciding factor. He says it proves that Britain's interests will be repeatedly and permanently hammered by the EU 27 for many years to come. Now, the government says with this programme we will now push ahead with a British-only sort of navigation system, potentially working with other partners around the world. But clearly, for Sam Gyimah, this was a step too far. And he feels, looking at all as a whole, this deal is something that he can't vote for now. So now here's another Conservative MP adding to the growing list that have publicly declared they're going to be voting against the Prime Minister's deal.
What's the Prime Minister's strategy, Drita?
You'll have to ask her, because I cannot see what her strategy is. I can't see how she's going to actually get this through Parliament. And I think Sam Gyimah is absolutely right with some of the things he says. The thing that jumped out of me, he writes in this piece in The Telegraph, Britain will end up worse off, completely right, transformed from rule makers to rule takers. We will be in an absolutely worse position. We might as well stay in the EU, is what people are saying. I'm saying that. Because this deal that she's negotiating, we won't have any rights. We won't really be at the table. They will be able to tell us what to do. And the idea that you can bring that to Parliament and that maybe she doesn't understand why some of her own party won't agree is really, really naive. And for her to have gone around the country as well, trying to get people to sign up to it, it's a huge disservice to Remainers and Leavers. We even wanted to leave the EU. Or, if we're not going to leave the EU, then we have to remain in the EU. We can't have a position where we end up being in a worse situation. I actually don't see how she can come out of this in a couple of months' time still being the leader of the Tory party.
Well, it might be a couple of weeks. Might be a couple of weeks' time. I mean, there's another element to this that I picked up on today. Conservative Home website promoted it. In fact, the BBC are now running it as a story. But it's been noted that the government are spending an as yet unknown amount of taxpayers' money promoting this deal through advertising on Google, on Twitter, and on Facebook.
Story. Look, I should have looked this up before I came into the studio tonight. But when I saw this story, it was actually before I left the house, and I thought to myself, are there no rules around this?
Well, lest we forget, before the referendum in 2016, the government spent £9 million of our money telling us we should vote Remain.
But are there no rules and restrictions around what the government can spend?
Well, no, because the only strict rules are about what the government can do during the purdah period, which is a period of 4 or 5 weeks immediately before a referendum or an election. Of course, we're not in an election or referendum situation at the moment, so the government, as far as it's concerned, can spend whatever it likes promoting its policies to the public.
Tell you what, Jonathan, I know we're not, but this feels to me as much like an election that many elections I've experienced.
Well,
it's got all of those little hallmarks and nuances. Like she's doing a tour, for goodness sake. She's electioneering.
But it's a very odd state of affairs because the only people who've got votes in the next fortnight are the members of Parliament. And it's quite clear that they are not going to vote for it, given that the opposition have en masse said that they will oppose it, apart from, I think, one Liberal Democrat MP. And obviously we've had now 7 members of the government resign to vote against it. Literally dozens of Conservative backbench MPs queuing up
right, so help
to
me
vote
with
against it.
Help me with this. So it's the MPs who'll be voting, and yet Theresa May has been reaching out to the public, reaching out to anybody but the MPs.
I know, it's extraordinary. It's absolutely
Well, she's been trying to use her whips, hasn't she, to literally whip her MPs into shape, and that's not actually been working as well. She's not going to get. It's not sympathy from the public, if that's what she's looking for, that's going to get her where she's going.
And in the process, I'm afraid she's kind of pulling the Tory party apart. Looking at Twitter this evening, the Conservative Party have evidently produced some advertising materials that they postcards they want people to send to their MPs telling them to vote for the deal. And you've got Tory MPs and Tory activists saying this is an obscene use of money that we have raised for our party to help fight elections and things in the future, promoting a policy that literally dozens of our MPs and tens of thousands of our members are opposed to. Steve Double, the MP for St Austell and Newquay, posted earlier on Twitter that he'd had the biggest attendance at a party meeting ever tonight, and that everyone was unanimous in supporting him in opposing the government's position.
But don't you think that throughout this whole referendum, this has been a party that has been falling apart? The Tory party has been falling apart and infighting for a heck of a long time. So I'm actually not surprised that we're ended up in this situation. I thought if it's this government, which it was, who were going to negotiate the deal, God help us all. And this is the situation where we are. So I'm not sure you can blame Theresa May for splitting this for the Tory party
well,
apart. I think you have to go right back to David Cameron if you're going to start pointing the finger.
Arguably, the reason why the referendum happened was because of deep splits within, particularly the Conservative Party, over this issue. And we know that for decades, particularly since the Maastricht in the early 90s, there have been increasing numbers of people in the Tory party who are deeply sceptical about the direction in which the EU was going, and increasing numbers of people saying they wanted out. And obviously the UKIP threat that translated into increasing support for UKIP in particularly European elections during the 2000s into the 2010s caused David Cameron to pledge to give the vote. And it's in the same way that the Labour Party in 1975 offered the referendum to kind of cover over the fact that the Labour Party at that time were deeply split over the European question. So, yes, you put it out to the public. The public gave the answer, and that's the point at which the government say, right, the public have given us an answer. We need to get on and do this. Whereas I'm afraid Theresa May and her government haven't actually delivered on the referendum result because of the botched deal that they've come up with.
You mentioned David Cameron there. We've heard during this campaign, if you want to call it that, we've heard from Tony Blair. My goodness, we've heard from Gordon Brown, haven't we? Do you think David Cameron has any type of duty as the Prime Minister who was around and prompted the referendum? Do you think he's got any duty to speak out about this?
I think he's rather sensible to keep quiet, because I think every moment that Tony Blair gets up in public or on television and says the people, you got it wrong, I think he actually hinders his own cause. Frankly, I think
he
former
didn't
Prime
quite
Minister
say that. He didn't quite say that when he was on it. Yeah, but he didn't quite. He didn't quite say that, but at least he came forward and he is saying something. I think that's our expectations from people who have been prime ministers, is during moments like this, they will come forward, the public expect them to have their say. The one guy who hasn't had his say is David Cameron, who set all of this running. And as soon as it all went wrong for him, what did he do? He just cut out. He just left the mess and just went off. He, to me, is obliged to have come back and looked the British public in the eye and have spoken to them. And he hasn't.
Well, why would that matter?
Because he is the person who started this all off. If you're a Prime Minister and you leave, you become a former Prime Minister, and you still are obliged to talk to the British public. And he hasn't done that. And I think it said something about the type of Prime Minister he was. Somebody asked me about his legacy on a TV programme. And I said, what's really interesting is nobody talks about Cameronisms in the way that they talk about Thatcherism or Blairite policies. Nobody will talk about Cameronisms. And I think people will forget his premiership. The one thing they remember will be this whole referendum mess that he left and he walked away from.
To be fair to Cameron, I think he was utterly right to call the referendum. I think that the country needed to have that vote because politicians of all parties had been failing to offer a vote on the issue over the decades as they were giving more and more power away to Europe. Where I think he failed the people was not to allow the civil service to prepare for any contingencies of what happens if the public vote to leave, because clearly that was a possibility. And before the referendum, there should have been preparation being done for both eventualities, remain or leave, and that didn't happen. And of course, he said, whatever you decide, I will implement. And of course, when the people gave him the answer that he didn't want, he decided to exit stage left.
But hang on, Jonathan, you said earlier, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, that really he was doing this because of what was happening inside his party. Had nothing to do with...
Was he doing it for the country or the party?
I was doing it for the party, wasn't he?
I think you could say that it was because of pressure on his party that he was forced to call the referendum, because the fact that UKIP won the 2014 European elections and that they were threatening Conservative seats, I think that exactly was one of his motivations for doing that. It doesn't stop it from being the right thing to have done, because, I say, politicians over years had kept signing away power through treaties without any permission.
But it wasn't some type of noble act by Cameron, was it?
No.
It wasn't about the country, it was about the Conservative Party.
Exactly. The public hadn't been asking for this, had they? The public hadn't been asking for this. Have birthday. I don't remember anyone saying to me, "Oh gosh, we must have a referendum." Nobody thought about it.
They were. It's been
not where I live. They weren't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not your average Joe, but I was a precocious schoolboy who wanted a referendum on the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. But over time,
why aren't you the old average Joe?
Because average Joes in school trousers weren't arguing about the Maastricht Treaty. But over time,
are you telling us you're slightly different?
Well, I think form your own conclusions. Over time, every single European treaty has ceded more and more power to Brussels. People have never been asked to give their permission. I think increasingly there was a sense that we needed to make a decision, and we did make a decision.
Listen, anyway,
and the government should be implementing it. I'm afraid they're not.
Enough of this Brexit stuff. The most important news that you both have brought me tonight is that it's the 1st of December. I would not have known this without you. I'm going home right now, and I'm not going to sleep until my tree is up.
No.
Well,
we look forward to seeing a picture on Twitter.
I'm completely spoofing. I'll be calling in, getting a burger and falling fast asleep about 5 minutes later. Hello, Dalton.
Hello, Stephen. I haven't got your tree, I'm afraid. I can't help, but thank you. Thank you for the offer. Yeah, one of these years. In the next hour, another night, another ministerial resignation that the Prime Minister will have to deal with when she returns to the from the G20 summit in Argentina. How much of a blow will the departure of her Minister for Universities, Science and Research be for the PM? Or is it simply academic? And do remember our World Football phone-in later.
First for news and more live Premier League football than anyone else. This is BBC 5 Live.
It's 1 o'clock on 5 Live as we welcome local radio stations from across the BBC. This is Up All Night. I'm Dotun Adebayo.
The main news on 5 Live, another